Hello everyone, Mr. Richmond here, and you are watching our video number 2, Life Science video number 2. This is classification part 2. And if you're wondering why I look so wonderful, I've just got back from running. I'm at my home on my porch with Elvis and Darth Vader and trying to recover. So I'm actually a little out of breath. It's probably a bad time to be trying to make an educational video. Even my ears are clogged up. So, good times. Alright, so enough about me. This is classification part 2, and I want to bring up our notes from class real quick here. And let's just quickly go through these. I know we went through them in class, but the goal of the video is to give you something to look back on as kind of a refresher in case you weren't able to quite catch on in class to what we were talking about, or maybe you zoned out for a minute, which I do also. So, all right, so classification. Again, classification is just the act of grouping things. In this case, we're talking about living things, all living things. The act of grouping things by using a set of rules. And scientists are going to always group living things according to how they're similar, so by similarities, right? Now, this whole idea of using a set of rules, I feel like that was one point in class maybe we were a little fuzzy about, but I'll explain that in just a moment, okay? But first, let's answer the question, why do scientists even take the time to group living things? And it goes back to the video, the last video, video number 1, and really it just makes it easier to find what we're looking for. You know, if I'm looking for things in the kitchen, it makes sense to group things according to where they would naturally be stored. Cold things with the cold things, and spices with the spices, and stuff that goes in the restroom area, the bathroom area, toothpaste, toilet paper, soap. You're going to store those things in those areas. Why? Because that's where you would expect to find them. It just makes sense. So scientists group living things in ways that just make sense. And they do that by looking at how things are similar. All right? Why? Because it makes it easier to find what they're looking for. And we're all the time studying the world and living things, and so it makes sense to be able to find what you're looking for. All right, so as I said, we have all living things, right? And so we're going to take all those living things and begin to separate them out into groups. The next level of groupings, or the next groups below all living things, those are the next headings, I'll get it here in a minute, are going to be the kingdoms. The kingdoms. Now, I don't know why they call the first large groupings kingdoms, but they do. Everything's got to have a name, and a kingdom's generally looked upon as being a pretty, a pretty large thing, and so I guess that's appropriate. So, under all living things, we then have 6 big groups, and those big groups are called kingdoms. Okay? Now, with the kingdoms, most of them are actually things you already know about, but there's a few you might not. So let's look at those 6 big groupings. The first one will be the animal kingdom. The second would be the plant kingdom. The third would be the fungi, not fungi. The next would be the protists. The next would be the monarans. And within the monarans, there are actually 2 kingdoms, okay? The monarans themselves would not be a kingdom, but the 2 kingdoms that would fit within the monarans are archaebacteria and eubacteria. So the archaebacteria would be a kingdom, and the eubacteria would be a kingdom. Now, if you don't understand that, don't worry, because we're getting ready to explain it, okay? So let's go back to this idea of using a set of rules that I said we would talk about. When I say using a set of rules to group things, what I'm really talking about would be looking at certain characteristics, or looking for certain characteristics, okay? And so let's go through each of these 6 kingdoms and see what kind of characteristics we're looking for to see if a living thing would qualify as being a part of that kingdom. All right, so let's start with an easy one, which is the animal kingdom. All right, in order to be an animal, there are 2 things scientists say that you've got to have to be a part of their group, or the set of rules would be made up of 2 characteristics. Okay, you with me? And those rules would be, the rule is you got to have many cells. An organism has to have many. Now, I don't mean tiny, many. I mean many cells. A lot of cells. You got to have a lot of cells. And so in order to be an animal, you got to have a lot of cells. And you also have to feed on living or once living things. Now, that makes sense because all animals are going to eat something else. Either that is alive or has been found its way to death's door. All right, and we know that. I'm not trying to be weirdy, but you know what I'm saying. All right. So when you eat chicken, or beef or whatever, it's gone through the process and it's no longer part of the living world. All right. So to be an animal, many cells, feed on living or once living things. And if an organism doesn't do one of those things, it can't be an animal. As simple as that. It doesn't fit. It doesn't go by the rules. You got to go by the rules. So examples of animals are going to be people, bears, monkeys, fish, spiders, and I could go on and on and on thousands of times because there are so many different kinds of animals in the sea, living in the earth, in the air. We have lots and lots of animals. And most of us are pretty familiar with animals because we've been learning about them for a long, long time. The next group is going to be the plant group. We all know what a plant is. But in order for an organism to be considered part of the plant kingdom, it also has to have a lot of cells. And you say, well, wasn't that the case with animals? True. But what makes the plants different is how they get their nourishment, how they eat. And plants actually have to make their own food. They create their own food within the plant cells and structures. Okay, they use sunlight, they use water, they use carbon dioxide gas, and they use those ingredients to make their own food, a simple sugar, and that's what they eat. They create it through photosynthesis. Animals can't do that. Animals have to go and find something to eat. Plants can't run around. They can't go looking or searching for something or hunt. So they make their own food, which is pretty awesome. So that's what you have to have. Those are the rules for being a plant. Lots of cells. You make your own food. What about fungi? Well, fungi also have a lot of cells, just like the two above. But instead of eating living or once living things or making their food, they actually absorb the nutrients from living things or once living things, maybe a dead log or something like that. As it rots, they'll absorb those nutrients. The good example would be a mushroom, a yeast, a mold, something like that. And when I say absorb, a lot of people don't understand the word absorb, but it's, they want to think of it as like maybe using a straw to suck up, the Coke or a milkshake or something like that. Oh, somebody's messing my video up. Brent, shut the door. But absorb is actually more along the lines of, let's say you have a spill, and you're going to take a paper towel and just kind of set it down on top of the spill, and the water just begins to be soaked up into that paper towel. That's absorption. That's what it means to absorb. The towel's not physically sucking the liquid up. It's just absorbed into the fibers of the paper towel. And that's what a fungi does. That's how it gets its nutrients. And so that's what makes it different from the first two. Now, after that, we're going to be talking about microscopic creatures. And when I say microscopic, I mean you can only see them, not with your eye at all, but you can only see them through a microscope. Something that can look at these microscopic creatures. And the reason that is that the protist and the two monaran kingdoms, the archaebacteria and the eubacteria, they all are only made up, each organism is only made up of one single cell. And so they're really, really small. You could never see them with your eye. So the protists are one-celled, and both the archaebacteria and the eubacteria are also one-celled. Now, what makes these three different would be this. The protists have what we call a cell nucleus, or all protists have cell nuclei. Now, what a nucleus is to a cell, it's kind of like what a brain is to us. A brain controls everything that's going on within our body, all functions. Now, cells, especially these little protists, these one-celled creatures, the archaebacteria, eubacteria, they don't really have a brain to think, but they have this cell nucleus that's kind of a command center, and it just kind of tells the cell what to do in very simple terms, very basic functions. And so it's not like they're thinking thoughts and things, because they do not. So, but the protists are one cell. They do have a cell nucleus, and they make their own food or feed on living or once living things. And examples of those will be algae or amoebas or diatoms. If you hear that noise, that's my wife pulling up. Hello, wife. But anyway, those are example protists. Now, how are the archaebacteria and eubacteria different? Well, number one, they're bacteria. Protists are not bacteria. They are one-celled, but these two kingdoms, these two types of organisms, do not have a cell nucleus or a command center. They are very, very simple organisms, far more simplified than the protist kingdom would be. And they also, some make their own food, some feed on living or once living things. The difference between the protists and the monarians, which would be these two kingdoms, would be the protists do have a cell nucleus. The monarians, the archaebacteria, and the eubacteria do not. Now, the difference between these two kingdoms, finally, the archaebacteria and the eubacteria, why is it, if they're both bacteria, why don't we just all put them in that monarian group and make the monarians the kingdom? Well, it's because scientists discovered these archaebacteria, and they're very, very different than all other bacteria. They only live in very harsh conditions, say in deep parts of the ocean where the pressure is unbearable, or in very, very hot places where, say, volcanic vents, where nothing else could really live. Everything else would be destroyed due to the heat. Well, these guys actually thrive there. And so scientists had to give them their own kingdom, because they are a chicken. Did you hear that chicken? My Lord. Because the archaebacteria are very different than the eubacteria. The eubacteria, all other bacteria. My neighbor has chickens. I hate them. So the 6 kingdoms: animals, chickens, plants, fungi, protists, and then the 2 monarian kingdoms are the archaebacteria and the eubacteria. I hate those chickens. Anyway, I hope that clears up some of what we talked about in class, and I'm getting out of here before that chicken crows again. I bet he does. Okay, maybe not. All right, we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, and we will continue this discussion in class. Bye.